Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 381. I'm recording this on December 5th, 2025. And this will go live on the 8th. I wanted to start out this episode talking about a theme that has come up over and over again when I've talked to teachers. And it came up again today when I was having a coaching call with a teacher. And I thought, this is such a common topic. I want to talk about it on the podcast before we go into the designated topic for today. So I want you to imagine you're teaching at a studio, and it might even be the studio that you practice at. And it might even be the studio where you took your 200-hour training. And you've been teaching maybe on the newer side, maybe you just started, or maybe you've been teaching for a little bit, and an opportunity comes up for you to cover a teacher's class, and it's someone that you really admire. And it's someone that, in your perception, is popular and has a lot of people come to their classes. And you've even gone to this person's class. And when you've attended this person's class, your perception is that they use really creative sequencing. And you have an opportunity to now sub this person's class. What do you do? What comes up for you when you think about subbing for this person? Because if you're like a lot of the teachers that I've talked to, you freak out. You question if you're ready. You question if you're worthy. You wonder if you're going to be able to meet the expectations of the students. You doubt that you're good enough to be able to cover for this particular person. And again, if you feel this way, you're not alone. I want to offer you, though, another way of framing this. And honestly, a lot of the mindset problems that yoga teachers have really can all be solved by changing our frame of reference and changing or trying reframing what we're thinking about. And reframing is sort of a cognitive term that comes from not just neuroscience, but neurolinguistic programming, which is a specific way of looking at how people think. And a lot of it is really based in just human nature. And when you look at this particular situation, of course, it's understandable you'd be nervous. And at the same time, we can dive into that feeling nervous and dive into all those negative things I just mentioned. Or we can reframe the situation and how we're thinking about it as an opportunity for us to step forward, as a chance for us to help this other teacher, as a chance and opportunity for us to start to be known in the studio, as a chance for us to get exposure to students who might otherwise never come to our class. It's a chance for us to feel uncomfortable and feel nervous, but move forward anyway. And that's the definition of courage. And that's how we grow. So you can see when we reframe it, all of a sudden, there are all these amazing opportunities that are available to us. But if we're just looking at it fueled by our limiting beliefs, then of course we're going to be petrified. Now, the other aspect of this that I want to share with you is the whole idea of walking in a room and people judging you, and walking in a room covering for somebody else and people automatically thinking, oh, she's not good enough, or, why is she here? All of that is based on this idea that everybody in the class, for the most part, is thinking about you. When in reality, most of the people in the class are thinking about themselves. Because that, again, is human nature. People are running their own scripts in their heads all the time, other than in the first few minutes when you walk in and they realize the regular teacher's not there. Once they start practicing, they're not really thinking about you. And even if there are a handful of teachers, students who are thinking about you, who are in their heads thinking, oh, I wish my regular teacher were here, or, oh, I don't like this person as much as my regular teacher. That's okay. That's their prerogative. And no amount of anything that you can do is most likely going to change their mind. So why worry about people in the class who might be upset that you're teaching versus the regular teacher? Because you can't control how they think anyway. Would it be ideal if everybody was happy that you were there covering? Of course, but that's not life. We can't please everybody. And our role as a teacher is not to be a people pleaser, it's to teach the class and to do it in a way that's detached from what people may or may not think of us. And to do it in a way that's detached from this idea of making people like you. But again, in most cases, if you were to stop the class and ask each person, what are you thinking of? They're not going to be thinking about you. But this is why this whole scenario is driven by the ego, this sort of ego-centered way of looking out at the world as if everybody is going to be judging you. And it's kind of funny when you think about it that the ego works this way, when in fact, what about the part of you that wanted to cover the class? That's the more elevated, higher energy, higher vibration part of you, not the ego part of you who's beating you up and making you feel badly. That's the lower vibration part of you. So keep feeding that higher vibration part of you and keep giving yourself good mental messaging rather than falling into the trap that the negative voice is trying to get you to be in. Now, the other thing I will say is this whole idea of, well, this teacher has really creative sequencing, and I don't think my sequences are creative enough. Why this is a problem is because you'll be tempted to create a whole new sequence, which is probably the worst thing you could do. Because walking into this room, you're obviously going to be nervous. And the last thing you want to do is have a new sequence you've never used. The best thing to do is to lean into your signature sequence because you already know it well. And therefore, you won't have to think so hard about what comes next in the sequence, and you'll be better able to manage your nerves. But if you go in with this brand new sequence filled with all these flippy dippy things and new things and quote unquote hard poses and creative transitions, it's only going to make it harder for you to stay calm and present because you're going to be so focused on thinking about the sequence. And the reason this action is so problematic is because, once again, it's fueled by this belief that students enjoy yoga classes because the sequences are really creative. And that is not true. That is not true. Yoga has been around for thousands of years before westernized yoga as we know it existed. And it was pretty simplistic back in the day. And people did it. And that was thousands of years ago. And people continue to do it. They continue to practice. And it's not because they're going to classes that are so different and variable and challenging sequences. It's because, as you know, there's something built in, there's something inherent in yoga that people are attracted to. The breathing properties of yoga, the nervous system down regulation, the contributing to their health and wellness, the taking time out of their day, the moving their body, the exercise aspect. And those things can be achieved even with the most basic sequence. So do not fall trap to this idea that only creative sequencing makes you a good teacher, or because you're subbing for this teacher who you perceived as really creative sequencing, that you have to do that. If that's not your style, why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to go into this class and teach it in a way that's authentic to you so those students get to see the real you? Now, one final thing I'll say is this. It's obvious you're going to be nervous, and everybody can relate to being nervous. So when you walk in the room, why not say something like, "Hi everybody, my name is Karen. As you can tell, I'm not Jessica. I'm covering for Jessica today, and I have to tell you, I'm a little nervous about it, but I'm really overall happy to be here. I'm really happy to support you in your yoga practice today. So let's start coming to downward facing dog." Say something to cut the ice. Say something to speak to the obvious. Say something to show a little vulnerability. Because in that act of being a little vulnerable, people will soften. Even the people who maybe are annoyed that their quote unquote regular teacher isn't there will start to see you as a human being and will realize, gosh, if this person didn't cover this class, we might not have even had any yoga today. Nobody is going to kick you when you are, I don't want to say down, but when you are admitting that, hey, you're human. It's understandably a little nerve-wracking to cover somebody else's class. Not to go in there and tell a sob story, not to go in there and say something because you want people to feel sorry for you, but to make light of it, right? As you can tell, I'm not Jessica. My name is Karen. I'm really glad to be here. Have to admit, I'm a little nervous, but overall, I'm really, really excited we have a chance to practice together today. So let's begin, right? Whatever it is you want to say, this is one of the ways you can build connection with your students by showing your authentic nature, by showing how you feel, not in a way to draw attention to yourself, but in this sort of unique situation, especially if it's somebody that's well known in the studio. It's more than understandable that you want to acknowledge it at the beginning instead of just walking in and just pretending like this is your class, which everybody knows is not. And then just do it. Keep the cues simple, use your signature sequence, and you'll be amazed if you just keep feeding that part of you that's high vibe, higher energy. You will do so well, and it will be a huge growth opportunity for you as well. So, with that, I wanted to talk a little bit today about. I was recently going back and looking at a list of terminology that I had created a couple of years back when I was really developing my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. And then this year, when I created my group program, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, that it didn't really expand on the blueprint program. It was a shorter, or it is a shorter, more accelerated, focused group program, but it's predicated on the same general teaching method. And so, what I wanted to do today is I wanted to share with you some of the anchor concepts in my teaching method. And some of you have heard some of these phrases. If you've watched my social media, if you're in one of these programs, you've heard some of this, and I wanted to kind of pull it together for you because once you enroll in one of my programs, I mean, to some extent, if you're watching my videos on social media, this will be somewhat familiar to you, and you might have a good sense of what I'm about by watching my videos. It's just that once you enroll in my program, one or the other, you will really be in my world in terms of being exposed to my teaching methodology. And there's a certain language to it that's very intentional. It's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to make it sound clicky because that's not what it's meant to sound like. It's it's just that the way that I describe things is very intentional. And I do it in a way many times because the ultimate goal I have is to make things clear and easy for you to understand, especially when it comes to anatomy and cueing and sequencing. And that's why I love when teachers say to me, I'm really getting it. I'm really finally learning anatomy. And it really has a lot to do with how you're presenting it and your teaching method. So I know that it's working and I know that it's resonating with teachers. And so that's why I wanted to, especially if you're in one of my programs and you haven't had a chance to sort of hear these teaching terms in one conversation. This might sort of pull it all together for you. So the first thing is authentic teaching. And authentic teaching has to do with a style of teaching where you're showing up as you, where you're not trying to copy anybody else. Some of what we just talked about in the first segment of this episode. It's a way where you're really going into your classes and teaching in a way that feels like yourself. You don't feel like you're trying to be like your mentor. You don't feel like you're trying to mimic what somebody else is doing, maybe somebody even you see on social media. And it feels really easy and fun. Now, this comes not just with experience, because honestly, there's many teachers I work with who've been teaching for a long time and they don't feel like they're teaching authentically. And that's often because they're not using a signature sequence. So, a signature sequence is something I have done a lot of videos on, the concept, and it has to do with creating a sequence you love based on what you know right now and teaching it over and over again until you can teach it without notes and by walking around. And trusting that, similar to what we just talked about, that's great. Trusting that you don't need to keep it interesting. You don't need to have all sorts of complex transitions. You don't need to change it every time you teach out of some false belief that that's what your students need. So, signature sequencing is a cornerstone of my teaching method, and teachers have just loved feeling like they have permission to do that. And that's what's always interesting to me. When I talk about this concept with teachers, they'll often say, I didn't even know I could do that until you offered it. And now I'm doing it, and I feel so much more confident teaching my classes. And this is part of what frustrates me so much about the yoga industry is that teachers do get subtle and not so subtle messaging that they need to change their sequence all the time. And this results in a whole bunch of downstream problems. The next thing is connecting cues. Connecting cues has to do with cues that resonate with students and are easily understood. And this idea of connecting cues, of course, the connecting means they're connecting with your students, is based on my framework of the four types of cues: action, alignment, anatomy, and somatic, and using those different types of cues in what I call cueing frameworks. So, one of the popular topics is how do I share anatomy in my cues? Well, I have a cueing framework for sharing anatomy in your cues, which is the following: share three action cues, and then share one anatomy cue that speaks to one of the muscles concentrically contracting. So the example I give all the time is for warrior one, step your right foot forward, drop your back heel, reach your arms up, and now squeeze your quads in your back leg to help you straighten your knee. So that's the format. 3 action cues followed by 1 anatomy cue that speaks to one of the muscles concentrically contracting. Now, side note here, you have to understand anatomy to teach an anatomy-based cue. And too many teachers are using anatomy in their cues and they don't understand it. I have conversations a lot where teachers will share with me the cues they're using, and I can tell from what they're saying that they don't understand it because the word choice is off. And I never, ever want anybody to feel like I'm trying to show them up with anatomy knowledge. This is not a contest. What I'll often do is say, can you tell me a little bit more about the why behind that cue? And that's where it will become revealed that they're not exactly sure. And so this is the kind of thing that actually is a good thing because it starts to bring to the surface an acknowledgement that the teacher has a learning gap around anatomy. So rather than continue to teach classes and use cues that the teacher doesn't really know, now we've sort of shown the light on the problem and now the person can do something about it. So connecting cues, I have a training video on cueing. So if you want that, just send me a DM and I'll send it to you. Now, the next concept in my teaching method is why words, WHY. And why words are reflective of the idea that when you're teaching from what you know, your confidence grows. And that comes from using cues where you understand the why behind the cue. So there's the cue you're saying, and then there's what's the reason for that cue? Or it could even be what's the translation of that cue? So every single cue you share has an anatomical translation. Step your right foot forward becomes flex your right hip, bend, flex your right knee, dorsiflex your right foot. Reach your arms up to the sky becomes flex your shoulders to 180 degrees of shoulder flexion. Obviously, we're not saying those things, but we need to know those things so that when we say it in a conversational way and when we see it land on our students, we understand the mechanics of what's allowing the student to do the action. And then if they're out of alignment, we have a better chance of helping them. So understanding the why behind the cue is really the way that you demonstrate that you've done the work to learn the anatomy, and therefore you're sharing cues that reflect your knowledge of anatomy, even if you're not literally using anatomy words and terms and phrases in your cues. You can teach in conversational words, in action words, like I mentioned before. And the knowing you have of the why behind the cue, even if the cue is simply an action cue, will infuse what you say with so much more confidence. And again, will allow you to say the cue and see what they do and change it if they're not doing the pose maybe in alignment or they're having trouble, things like that. Now, anatomy action words is sort of wrapped up in what we just discussed. These are cues that focus on the anatomy in a clear and understandable way. Doesn't mean you're sharing complex principles. Sometimes teachers will say to me, oh, well, I don't really need to learn anatomy because I'm teaching slow flow and I'm not really giving them a lot of anatomy cues. Well, that doesn't make any sense. The style of yoga you're teaching doesn't opt you out of the requirement to understand anatomy. You could even make the case that in a slower flow, you need to understand more anatomy because the holds are longer. So everybody needs to understand it because we're all teaching movement. Doesn't matter what style you're teaching. Now, having said that, of course, there are some cues you're going to share that are literally going to speak to the anatomy, and other cues where you're speaking to action or alignment or somatics, not speaking literally to the anatomy. But as I said, the fact that you know it is going to transmit so much more confidence. Quick sidebar, I was teaching one of the sessions this week for the teachers in the November group of the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator. And one of them said, as she's been in the program, she's felt so much more calm and present teaching her classes. And I think she even said, I walk in the room and I feel like I sort of have this calm command of the room, and I share my cues without any apologies or trying to dilute them. I just say, this is what we're going to do. And that's one of the ways that you will transform when you understand anatomy. You won't be up talking, you won't be lowering your voice, you won't be saying things in a way that's kind of sheepish, like I'm not really sure, or you won't be using a lot of permissive phrases that oftentimes teachers do, this whole do it if you want, or or if it hurts, don't do it, and only do it if it's in your practice, and things that are just so in this mode of permissiveness, which at face value, we think, well, that's how we want to be because we want people to be able to honor their bodies and do what they want. But don't you see that that philosophy is already baked into the practice? We never, as the teacher, are dictating what people do. The problem with all that permissive languaging is that it it comes across oftentimes as you're not actually teaching anything. You're just kind of saying to people, don't go to your edge, or don't, I'm not saying push yourself. It's just from almost from an energetic perspective, it's almost like I'm afraid to take control and just simply state, here's what I want you to do. It's the difference between, okay, everybody, let's come into crow pose. Come on down, spread your fingers wide, set your hands up, shoulder width distance apart. Now I want you to wrap your elbows in, come up onto your tiptoes, set your elbows on your triceps, and begin to rock forward. Lift your chin a little bit, draw your belly button in, right? So I'm teaching crow. Now, the alternative is, okay, everybody, we're going to do crow. If crow is in your practice, go ahead and do it. If not, feel free to rest. Now, there's nothing bad or wrong with option B. It's just that when you have a confident feeling that you understand anatomy, you're not going in there to make excuses. You're not going in there to baby people or dilute things. You're just going in and just sort of agnostically saying, here's what we're going to do, knowing that baked into yoga is agency that every student has over what they want to do. The other reason this particular thing is problematic in my mind is I'll have a lot of conversations with teachers who worry that their older students can't do certain things. And these worries are simply a reflection of the lack of understanding of anatomy. So they'll say to me, well, my students can't do high to low push up, or my students can't do pigeon on the ground, or my students can't do balancing poses. These are all things that students, especially if they're older, need to do for a whole bunch of musculoskeletal and strength building reasons. And what you'll find is when you learn the fundamentals of anatomy, you won't be afraid anymore of presenting these things. And you'll just sort of agnostically, like without drama, without fear, without voice wavering, you'll just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. This. You'll be watching them. You'll be teaching your signature sequence. It's just a totally different approach. The next concept I talk about a lot in my teaching methodology is the walk and talk. This whole idea of walking around the room and watching your students instead of the practice with me approach. Now, there's nothing good, bad, wrong, or otherwise. You can do whatever you want. It's just that when you start walking around the room, it's a demonstration, number one, of the fact that you know your signature sequence and you don't need to practice it to remember it. It's an opportunity for your students, even the ones who have unfortunately become dependent on yoga teachers to do it with them. Now they have an opportunity in your class to learn how to listen to cues and integrate it into their body. This is a skill. This is a learning skill. You will be helping those students learn, like literally at the brain level, at the level of building new neural pathways. So the walk and talk primarily gives you a chance to see them. And given that they're not talking, the only way you'll know if your cues are working is to watch them. So this whole idea of the walk and talk is part of my teaching methodology because it's such a powerful way to teach. If you're looking for tips on how to get started, send me a DM, or you can just go to my Instagram because I have a video linked right off my bio link. The link in my bio has an option where you can download the training video for how to do the walk and talk. The next concept I talk about a lot is the concept of momentum magic. Momentum magic is the feeling you get when you formerly were feeling stuck, maybe not feeling really confident. And then when you enroll in my program and you start to make forward moving progress because you're being supported in a mentor driven program with a proven methodology, and you start to feel like I'm getting closer to being the kind of teacher I want to be. And with every successive class you teach, with every successive training session you come to with me, you'll learn more, you'll feel supported, you'll start to feel like you're moving closer to the kind of teacher you want to be. And that feeling is so magical. Think of anything else in your life you desired, you wanted. Maybe it was like an exercise program, and at the beginning it was hard to get started. But once you started exercising on a regular basis, you built momentum and you felt good in your body. And so it got easier to keep up with it and you were getting good results. And so that feeling of momentum is magical, which is why I call it momentum magic. So this is baked in to the way I work with teachers through lots of different techniques, some of which are not even really apparent to the teachers, but it's part of why I set up my two programs the way I do, so that teachers immediately start to feel like they're making progress. Because I know that when they feel like they're making progress, they'll be more inclined to come to the live sessions, to watch the replays, to experiment with things in their classes, and to start to see the results that they want. There's nothing worse than when you sign up for a program and you don't actually do it, and then you feel guilty that you spent the money. So there's a lot of things that I do to develop relationships with the teachers that enroll, to keep them engaged, to give them fun little check-ins so that they're feeling like they're testing their knowledge and they're demonstrating they're learning things. All these things build momentum and help the teachers feel like they're moving closer to the way they want to teach. And that feeling is the magical feeling. And that's why I call it momentum magic. The other piece that I talk about, and this is really central to everything, is the blueprint, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint, the 10-step Yoga Anatomy Blueprint. This is my own sort of trademark way of presenting anatomy. I so wish that, honestly, if I had the time and the energy, I would lobby Yoga Alliance to work with me and use my methodology as the global standard for how anatomy is taught. I know that might sound a little lofty of me to say, but I really believe that teachers could benefit from having a standard way anatomy is taught. All of the problems I see come from teachers who are learning anatomy in their 200-hour trainings so many different ways. And even if they're having a good experience, they may not be learning things that really move the needle with respect to how they feel, with respect to their sequencing, their cueing. But aside from that, the premise is the same. The 10-step anatomy blueprint is my signature way I teach anatomy. And it's based on this idea of having you focus on the 10 components of anatomy that really move the needle when it comes to how you feel and what you're offering your students and how you're cueing them. And it took me years of curating anatomy information to really present what I believe through my teaching experience, through my teacher training teachers experience, is the stuff that moves the needle, is the content, are the lessons that move the needle. And so that's something that a teacher wouldn't have access to. Oftentimes, matter of fact, just yesterday, I had a teacher say to me, I have a bunch of the anatomy books that are super popular, the ones that have the pictures of the poses in them. You know, I should probably just read those, right? Like, is that what you would suggest? And I wrote her back and I said, that's actually not what I would suggest. It's great to have those books for reference, but it's really hard to learn anatomy on your own just by looking at a book with poses in it. Anatomy needs to be discussed live. It needs to be not in person, it can be done online, but it needs to be discussed live. It needs to be presented live in a vibrant way, in an interactive way where you get a chance to ask questions. And the book reading part is just like a secondary part or a cherry on top. The main way teachers learn best, in my experience, is when they are there live, when the information is being presented to them live, and they have a chance to ask questions. And the teacher, me, has a chance to drop in other little things. So I'm testing their knowledge along the way. So my 10-step anatomy blueprint, we don't have time to go into the steps right now. If you're interested, I'm happy to share those with you, and you can just send me a DM on Instagram for that. And then the last thing is really just vision driven. Vision driven means you are driven by the vision you have of the kind of teacher you want to be. And sometimes we forget that because, maybe we're bogged down with creating sequences, or maybe we're not feeling super confident. It's just really important that we take a step back and ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Why did I sign up for that 200-hour training? Why am I teaching yoga? And to reconnect to those feelings of, I'm doing it because, and fill in the blank. I mean, it's always a personal reason from teacher to teacher. It's just that because teaching yoga is such a personal growth opportunity, sometimes we can get caught up in the mental challenges we're having or the limiting beliefs we're having. And we can sort of forget, why did we even do this in the first place? Why did we go to that 200-hour training? Why did we start teaching? And see, when you get clear on what your vision is for the kind of teacher you want to be, that gives you an endpoint. Maybe not the endpoint for your life of teaching, but for right now. And if you've ever read the book, Stephen Covey's book, The Habits, what is it? The 8 Habits of Effective Living, begin with the end in mind is one of the hallmark phrases in his book. And so if you're teaching and you don't know what you want as your ultimate vision, it can feel like you're just spinning your wheels. But if you're teaching and you're clear on, why am I doing this? How do I want to show up in my classes? What's my vision of the kind of teacher I want to be? Then you're going to make really good choices about the programs you enroll in. You're going to make good choices about the sequences you create, the cues you use, the kinds of classes you teach, where you teach, how you carry yourself in your classes. It all will come from the vision you have. So I hope this has been interesting and helpful. I hope there have been some points that have resonated with you. And I'd love to hear any comments or thoughts that you have. So feel free to send those to me on Instagram. And, one final thing, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, I'm going to be shifting in January 2026 to only accepting new students into the program in the first week of the month. So if you've had your eye on working with me in the Accelerator program, you'll be limited to enrolling to the first week of every month. And the spots that I've open will be limited to 5. And there have been months I've had more than 5. So here we are. I'm recording this in the beginning of December. If you're listening to this in December and you have had your eye on this program, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it and you are interested, know that the doors will open the first week of January for enrollments for January. And if you miss having a chance to enroll then, you'll need to wait until February, or if you sign up later in the week, you might miss one of the open slots. So just keep that in mind as you're planning ahead for what you want to be doing next year. The other thing, just as we wrap up, is keep in mind that classes are going to be very busy in January. So if you do hear this in December, if you do catch this episode in December, and you know you've got a learning gap around anatomy, I know the holidays are coming, but my accelerator program is a really easy program to fit into your life. Wouldn't you love to be the kind of teacher who come January 1st isn't freaking out in your full classes, in your busy classes with all those beginners? Wouldn't you like to be the kind of teacher who feels like, I got this, I know exactly what I'm doing? So you could use, the rest of December in my program to become that kind of teacher. And because December isn't January, I am allowing people to enroll at any point in December. It's just that come January, it'll just be the first week of the month. So if you're interested, the link to the program is in the show notes. It's in my Instagram link. It's on my website, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator. So with that, it was great to be with you, and I look forward to talking to you on the next episode. Namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.